what up, Gabriel here. Have the counterpart to that last tier list we did with the uncommon banners. Now we're going to look at the rare banners. And I do think that this list is a lot less useful. The thing about rare banners is they actually are rare, unlike rare spells / non-banner units. You know, those ones you're guaranteed to see every run, but the rare banner units you aren't guaranteed to see, and when I look at the data that is reflected, like you really just don't see these units having much sample size, so it's really is honestly tough to evaluate them, especially when a lot of them are situational. Granted that the situation that they're good in for a lot of these is pretty common to find. But all that being said, you know, I don't have 30 runs on any of these units to really get a accurate, like a super accurate sense of. So this is really just completely based on my personal experience. As always, I think pay more attention to the top, not to the bottom. Though I am pretty adamant that the ones I put at the bottom are crap. But, you know, maybe they're not that bad. It's hard to say. I literally never pick them. But, you know, we'll get into it here. So, and, you know, as always, if you have any disagreements, I know one in particular people are going to disagree with, but I still hold true to my evaluation on it. You'll see it. It'll come in the B tier. But, you know, as always, I love discussion on these type of topics. So if there's anything you are surprised by or have massive disagreements with, let's hear it. So the first one, I think for me personally, it's going to be Apex Imp. You know, theoretically there exists some run where you never find any form of armor, and in that case it's not going to be that good of a unit, obviously, but in my runs, I've yet to have that happen. I've had ones where it's like not a whole lot of armor not a whole lot of armor gen, and even then it's still really good. All you need is some armor generation, whatever that may be, and it's great. I'll even say you could just simply have a rail beater infuse into it, get the initial 30 armor, and never get any other armor in a run, and it'll still be good. I mean, that's 30 armor and 30 rage to start with. It's ridiculous. Plus on top of the, you know, initial rage that it gets. It is a little bit multi-strike reliant, as a lot of these are, but I think it's less reliant on multi-strike actually because it's a very good candidate for overstacking. The only card that you wouldn't want it to overstack with would be if Welder Helper is your main armor gain game plan. If it's not Welder Helper though, there's so many, basically everything else is conducive to the overstack plan, especially Steelworker and the Steelworker infusion. So you can overstack, you know, 3 of these, spend all your hell vents on them, and even if you miss on multi-strike, you'll still get gigantic strikes that will surely kill anything in one hit. And you can get 3 to 4 of these on a floor and you're good. You know, if they have Steelworker infusion, that's GG. Even without Steelworker infusion, even cards that normally are kind of bad, like Fortify, become quite fine here. Even like Enrage, and then obviously the big hitters like Alloy, Branded Right, or Branding Right. All of those are going to be great. You can also get multi-strike via the Horned Warrior infusion, which is A-OK on this, because we're assuming you're probably finding armor for it. Also Quick on this. Quick and multi-strike is basically what you're looking for in Apex Imp. Quick will prevent a lot of damage, obviously, and then multi-strike just allows you to delete 2 tanks from the game. Just a crazy good unit. I think it's the best in the game. But not close, or not far behind, I would say, is Deranged Brute. And technically in my data, Deranged Brute is the #1 winning rare. I just haven't found Apex Imp as much. I haven't lost with it, though. I've lost, I think, was it once or twice with Deranged Brute, but still the most wins attached to a rare banner are with Deranged Brute. I'm not counting colorless ones, by the way, like Dante. I don't think they really fit into the theme of what we're trying to do here. But, you know, Deranged Brute, similar to Apex Imp, I'm sure there's some run where you don't find Rage. I've technically had that happen, but you're usually going to have rage with Hellhorned, and depending on how much you can generate, this Deranged Brute unit just gets out of control. And it really is very flexible. Like, unlike Apex Imp, you don't really need to find multi-strike, because it doesn't have to be the unit that actually carries you. You know, you can have any other unit on the floor that you're stacking rage to, and that the Deranged Brute can either tank or even just sit there as like a totem, basically. But it also can just be your damage dealer. Like, if you find a multi-strike in Deranged Brute, where you're probably going to be fine, you can just stick it on it. It has decent starting stats. It has enough health that I would say in a lot of builds you don't even have to add health to it if it's going to be either a totem or a backliner. And you can just do like multi-strike twice or multi-strike plus quick. I find multi-strike plus quick is generally the ideal combo with both these units. Assuming in the Deranged Brute scenario that you're using it as your actual, killing unit and not just a totem. It can fit any of those. It's really nice in that regard. As for how to use it, it can be great in overstacking, similar to Apex Imp. The more you have of these on a floor, it does stack the effect of the rage that it gives. But it's also fine to not overstack and just do like a fledgling imp build, endless fledgling imp. That'll be just fine. You could tank with a Deranged Brute or backline with it, whatever makes sense. Maybe you want a Horned Warrior behind that already has a multi-strike that can deal the damage, and you can just tank with a Deranged Brute in that case, and chump block with the endless fledgling imp in front. A lot of flexibility with this card. Just crazy the amounts of damage that Deranged Brute can add to a floor. Then the next one I'm going to say is Lodestone Totem. This is another one where I feel like if you get through to your first hell vent of it, it should be a win. It's a little bit harder to pull off in the DLC than it was prior to the DLC, simply because of one particular thing in the Divinity fight, and that is the Spikes mini-boss. 1 out of 3 times you're going to face it, which translates to 100% of the time you will face it when you pick Lodestone Totem. So you do need some other, game plan to deal with that Spikes boss. Whether it's fitting like another good damage dealer on the floor, like a Nameless Siren, or getting some spell weakness plus really heavy hitting spells, you're going to need something else than just your Lodestone Totems. But for the most part, you'll get through most of the game just on the back of how powerful Lodestone Totems are. I would say in a general sense, I target trying to get 3 on a floor. Unless I have like double Incant, Founding Seal, Artifact. But I think if you have 3 to 4 of these on a floor, you can miss, or at least 3 to 4 in your deck. You don't have to fit them all on. The thing I like about Hellventing, I basically visit every Hellvent when I see Lodestone Totem and just Hellvent it. That way, if you can't play it early on, like if you draw too many in one turn and you don't have some artifact like Hell's Banners or something that can help you get them all out, then you can just draw back through the deck and then put them down again. But if you have like 3 or 4 of them, if you draw 2 in your opener or 2 on like the second turn, you're still likely to at least get 2 of these down. Really, you want 2 of them down minimum to really get the full proper effect out of Lodestone Totem. I think the people that struggle with Lodestone Totem often just don't make enough of them. That's usually what I see. It's like they think, okay, I can just put 1 down and it'll give me a lot of value. And it'll give you some value, but it's not like reliable enough, I would say. If I'm going Lodestone, I want to go all in and just sap the ever-living shit out of everything. And if you do that, it's pretty hard to lose. In fact, I don't think I ever have past a certain point in the DLC, like after I knew to, prepare for Spike's boss. And then next on the list is another one that falls in a similar boat as Apex Imp and Deranged Brute, or it's like, yeah, technically there's probably a deck, and probably even more likely than these two, right? That's why it's a little further down the list. But there is, decks where you're starting Dregs and you just never find Reform. You never find Dark Calling, and you never find like an Endless or something on this. technically that exists, but, you know, the majority of the time you probably will find that eventually, and in that case, Bounty Stalker is just one of the easiest units to just scale out of control. You know, there's a few permanent scaling cards at the rare tier. The other ones would be Overgorger and Steelsinger. And I think Bounty Stalker is the easiest of all of them to really scale out quickly. You know, it scales a lot quicker than the other ones, and it's just easier. Like, simply dying is a lot easier, I find, than stacking Gorges, or stacking Cultivates on units that, by the way, cost more pip and Ember. You know, this is 2 and 3 pip, this is 3 and 4 pip, this is just 2 pip and 1 Ember. So, Bounty Stalker is just really smooth usually, and usually carries the hell out of a run. And the final unit that I'm putting in the S tier is Offering Monument, which is the weirdest unit on this list, really, because it's the only unit that doesn't really, like, sit on your floor. It just kind of sits. It's like a utility, completely a utility unit. You know, you could argue the same with Lodestone, but I find they're a lot different, because Lodestone will just sit on your floor for the whole fight, right? But Offering Monument is ephemeral. It's gonna provide you a ton of incant gas. And yeah, there's some times where it doesn't make sense, particularly in like a non-conduit Frozen Lance deck where you just don't have the Ember to make proper use of it. But in a conduit deck and in any Forgone Power deck, Offering Monument's just going to be crazy. It'll give you so much incant gas, and if you have any sort of Siren or Eel Gorgon on the floor with you, or something infused with their effects, the Siren effects at least, you are probably not going to lose, because you are just going to scale those units out of control. And worst comes to worst, it has an okay infusion. I will say, I don't typically use the Apex or Deranged Brute infusion, the essences. They're just too useful as a unit, and their essences aren't anything special. Lodestone Totem, sometimes you can use the essence. I still think, though, that the value of it as a 1-pip unit is too hard to pass up. I rarely will infuse that. And then Bounty Stalker theoretically can be an okay essence. It's like half value, but I don't know. I kind of just use the Bounty Stalker as a unit. Even though the essence is technically good, I feel like I'd rather just use Bounty Stalker. So Offering Monument's the only one in the S tier I'd say that has kind of like, if the unit didn't work out, it has a pretty good essence. It's not that good of an essence, honestly, but it's okay. It's just you draw 1 extra each turn, which is fine. If you want to dedicate that to a unit, sometimes it makes sense. And that's the end of the S tier. And just I think S tier is like, you pick these and they're basically going to win you the run in almost every scenario. I can't think of too many times I get these units and then I just don't auto-win. And then now we get to A tier, which is basically the same thing. They generally will auto-win you a run, except I find they're just a bit more sometimes situational and a little bit more awkward sometimes. So this one, I was very close to putting this into the S tier, Eel Gorgon. The reason I don't is that I think it's easier to miss on what you need with this one, because the only thing that makes sense with Eel Gorgon is stats. So at a Merchant of Steel, basically, Quick, Endless, and Multi-Strike are completely useless to you with this unit. Only Lodestone is good. And really just, only stat upgrades are good. And often you need Lodestone to really get the proper value out of it. Especially if you don't find a good essence for it. Like if you don't find like a Siren of the Sea or any of the sort of pseudo Lodestone, like Demon Fiend, those type of essences. If you don't just find straight stat, giving essences, and you don't find Lodestone, you don't really have that good of a unit a lot of the time. Your best bet at that point is just to add like either a Train Steward infusion or along with like a 25 health upgrade and maybe a plus 10 damage upgrade. Sometimes you won't even find that. You might get stuck with like a Battlestone. And in those cases, the thing about Eel Gorgon is, it can't stack armor. It can't stack any buffs like rage and regen. It can't use quick enchantments. It can't even use the Wiltington quick enchantment. So I find quick is often very, very useful and almost necessary for a lot of runs. And the fact that it just can't get any of that does really make me not want to put it in the S tier. I've had runs where I've lost with Eel Gorgon, and I've had a lot of ones that are just really close with it. It's a very fun unit in my opinion, but at the same time it can be very frustrating. It's also very susceptible to spikes. It's very susceptible to just dying in general, if you don't have the proper, if you think about it, like a top floor setup can only really work if you can either sap or daze divinity or if you're like awoken and have heals, because like I said, your armor goes away, you can't stack armor, you can do a temporary lifesteal, but you can't really stack lifesteal. Not that you would anyway with the amount of multi-strike, but I guess what I'm saying is there's just a lot of situations where Eel Gorgon doesn't necessarily, it can catch you by surprise and you'll lose. But that's not to say it's not an amazing unit. Like I said, I was very close to putting it in the end of S tier. I could probably still argue it there, because really, Stitchin has the monopoly on just having all three rares being great. I don't think any other clan can say that. In fact, I know not every other clan can say that, other than maybe Melting. Speaking of Melting, this one was a hard one for me to evaluate. This is a unit that, cause here's the thing, 4 of these so far existed prior to the DLC, 4 of these rares, and they were all, I would say, still S tier back then, the 4 up here. But Legion, it existed prior to the DLC. I would never say it's even A tier before it. It had its uses, but it's jumped up significantly in the DLC, I think, because of some specific infusions that really just get it out of control. And the most obvious one is going to be Explosive Tomb. When you have that and either Endless or Reform, it's pretty much GG. It wins the game on its own. I mean, if you have that infusion, it's right there with Apex Imp. Problem is, there's only 2 rings to find the Explosive Tomb, so often you don't find it. And in those cases, there's still a lot of other infusions that can work pretty well on it. Like, you can put the Devourer of Death and get some good AoE bombs going off. It's not as good as Entombed Explosive, but it's up there. You can also get just multi-strike from like Draft is fine. You can get Molting Imp infusion, where it doesn't die, it doesn't explode on Extinguish, it just explodes on Summon. It's essentially the same as the Devourer of Death one. So, I don't know, there's a lot you can do with it. It also has an okay essence, even though I hardly ever use it, since I'm typically wanting to put, infusions into Legion of Wax. But it's worth noting, you can put its essence into a Wickless Baron or something. Any tank, really. It's essentially gonna, at the minimum, half the damage that's coming in, because every other turn you're getting a chump blocker, or every other hit you're getting a chump blocker. And if you have any sort of harvest synergy, it definitely can help with that in a pretty big way. So like I said, Wickless Baron loves to have that infusion if it's gonna tank. But that's Legion of Wax. I think if you don't get the really crazy infusions, it's maybe more of the B, C tier level. So it's a unit that really doesn't fit into A. It's either S, B, or C. I think it averages out to A, is basically how I'm evaluating it. And the next on this list is Steelsinger. It's hard for me to evaluate this one as well. Half the time you're going to have Restore as your starter card, and in that case, it's gonna be a win most likely. Even if you don't find multi-strike, I will say it is somewhat multi-strike reliant, but even if you don't find multi-strike, you could just Helven it twice, and you'll have, 3 floors of these big bad boys there, and they'll delete. Hopefully the Hellvents are later in the run, that way you can make the most value out of it. But that's often the case, right? A lot of times it's ring 7 and ring 8 that your Hellvents, the final 2 Hellvents are. It's always going to be on ring 8, but a lot of times it's on ring 7. And in those cases, you can just have a single Steelsinger, buff the shit out of it, and then Hellvent it late when it already has well over 100 to 200 attack, right? Now the problem does become, though, when the Hellvents are early, you might not be able to, so if the Hellvents are early and you don't get multi-strike, that can be an issue. Also, if you have root seeds, it becomes often an issue to actually be able to get enough cultivates, on this, or rejuvenates on this to actually get the proper value. But all that being said, I think more often than not, you can make it work. And when you do make it work, it's pretty much a free win. The stats on this thing are pretty crazy. Unlike Overgorger, which has abysmal starting stats and can often just lose you the game early, Steelsinger starts out with just fine stats, right? You're getting like, what is it, a 20-40 baseline. And if you have any big heals, it has that big, it's a hollow, right? So it has a bunch of max health that can be gained. So it already has okay attack and health just from the get-go. And if you have any amount of heal, it will definitely get you through Relentless in those early rings. And then you can just keep stacking it and it'll get going, and it can often be pretty smooth. But 4 pip and 3 ember is a lot to cost. So it's not super smooth all the time. It can be pretty awkward. It takes a little bit of playing around with. I sucked with it at the start, but lately I've been doing pretty good with it. And I do think you can basically win with it. Similar to the S tier levels when you have Restore as your starter. But with Root Seeds, it's a lot more situational. And then the next one I have in the A tier, this one's a hard one for me to really fit into the rare tier list, because it's like I'm trying to also line this up with the uncommon tier list that I did. Because Glareminder out of all these does not feel like a rare. It feels much more like an uncommon unit. Like all the other units here feel like rares. Like they're unique. They have the crazy ceiling. Glareminder doesn't have that. It's pretty much feels like a normal banner unit. An uncommon banner unit, I mean. And it's just a sweeper. And the effect is pretty meh. And the essence is pretty meh. I don't think I've ever made a deck based around its etch effect. Granted, sometimes it is the extra damage I've needed to kill some stuff, but it's similar, I think, to the Kinhost Pupae in what it provides as far as Reap goes. Like, it's just a little bit of an extra benefit. And if I were to compare it to the other sweepers, I still think the Awoken Sweepers are S tier above this. And I would say it kind of fits similar to where the Stygian Sweepers are. It has less stats. It has an effect. It has more it has less stats than Husk. Has more stats than Shattered Shell, but I don't think the effect is nearly as good as Shattered Shell's effect. So I find it, if I were to rank it compared to the Stygian Sweepers, I'd probably rank it like a few slots better than the Stygian Sweepers. Remember, the Stygian Sweepers were at the end of A tier in the uncommon list. I'd put Glareminder at like the mid of A tier in the uncommon list. I do think it's better than the Stygian Sweepers because it has more health essentially and more damage. And the effect I'd say is similar in value to their effect. So it has a little bit of edges here and there, but nothing massive. I still think the Awoken Sweepers are better. But at the end of the day, it's a sweeper. And it has okay stats, so it's still an A tier unit. It's just, it's reliant on finding good damage upgrades, right? Razor sharp edges, ritual of battles, fledgling imps, things like that to really scale it, because it doesn't scale on its own like a lot of these others do. And that's the end of A tier. I imagine people are gonna have the most qualms with the next unit I'm about to rate here. Though probably everything in B tier, I could say, I can make arguments I'm probably to some extent underrating them, but like I said, so it's Morsel-made. I think you only have the sample size that you have to go off of when you're playing with these rare units, and I think you're going to find wildly varying experiences with them because we only have, 10 to 20 totals, if that, experiences with a lot of these units. And I'll be honest, my experience with Morsel-made is that it's very underwhelming in a lot of runs. And I think what that really comes down to is that morsels suck. Even with something like Morsel-made, the scaling that morsels provide is not on the level of every other clan's forms of scaling. Even Umbra's own clan has better forms of scaling than morsels, and it's called Ember Drain. Ember Drain is way better than morsels, even with Morsel-made. Not to mention, it also prevents probably the best card in Umbra, Shroud Spike, from being used. So I think, that I know I'm in the minority here in not liking Morsel-made, and I'll extend that to its essence. I don't think putting its essence into units is that powerful. Putting it into, say, it's probably at its best when you find an alloy and infuse it into Morsel-made. That I will say is strong. That I will say is S tier. But that's it. I don't think like Morsel-made itself is on the level of these S tier units. Like, it's comparable to an Apex Imp and a Bounty Stalker, I would say. It's a single striking unit that scales based on something, but I think that typically Bounty Stalker and Apex Imp will scale massively more than Morsel-made will. The only time Morsel-made will scale ridiculously is if you have some of those large morsel generating cards, like a Wretch, or a Consume Removed Packed Morsels, or like a Gem Trove. If you don't have that, it's really not that good. And even then, it as a unit needs multi-strike or trample, or else it's like, I don't know. It's not one of these other units where you can Hellvent it a few times and have it be useful. This one won't be that way. Everything goes into the one unit. Whereas these units, I can Hellvent them, I can have multiple of them sitting around, and they'll do things. That's true of basically every unit above it. And like I said, morsel scaling sucks. Like, the best stat morsel you have gives 6/6. So, you basically infuse this into, say, a sweeper or something, and your best case scenario is that all it did is granted you something where you can generate a morsel miner and get a 6/6 into that unit. But that's not even as good for dealing damage as just simply like a razor sharp edge, It's certainly not as good as like a Ritual of Battle or a Fledgling Imp. Basically, like I said, every other clan has better ways to scale than morsels. So I really do find it's overrated. And, I could probably be convinced otherwise, but I will say it's been very, very underwhelming for me when I've used it in either capacity, either as a unit or infusing it into stuff. It's often resulted in losses for me. I don't think it's the free win that everybody claims it to be. And then the next one is harder for me to evaluate. I debated putting it into the A tier, but it is a 2-cost, 3-pip unit. But I don't know. It is another one of these where it is reliant on finding multi-strike or trample. But it's still pretty fine. Like the situations that you're able to make it work are pretty often, and it has a very good essence, I would say. It's one of those units that's probably best off just used as an infusion into other things, but it works fine on its own as a unit. I could maybe bump it up here, but I don't know. I think in general, I definitely know based on my data, I'm taking all of these units way more than I'm taking Sludge Boss. I didn't really factor in the infusion, but I don't think I've really used its infusion that much either, to be honest. Even though it is good, it just doesn't work out that I usually need it. These other units are just so more consistently takeable. I feel like the take rate and the win rate of these units is significantly better for me than anything I've put in B tier and below. But, you know, it's still a good unit. It was probably better prior to the DLC, I'd say, as a unit. But as an infusion, it's pretty crazily good. Any sort of sweeper or multi-striker will really benefit from this. You know, it does cost you an extra pip, but it's one of those like Alpha Fiend where it's totally worth it. But yeah, I guess the way I would say is it's decent as unit, but much better as a infusion. I could probably put this in the A tier though, but I'm leaving it in B tier for now just because I haven't really found myself using it nearly as much in the DLC. And then the other one, this is the final one I'm putting in B tier, is Overgorger. I think a lot of people might also disagree with me on this one. I really, really don't like Overgorger. Its stats are abysmally bad to start out with. You know, 15 health is so fragile for a unit that has to frontline. And it's 2 Ember and 3 Pip on top of that. So it's not like putting some chump blockers or defense in there on top of being able to gorge your units is the smoothest thing in the world. It's very fucking hard to pull off a lot of the time. And I think more often than not, Overgorger results in a loss for me. It's just such a trap. That being said, obviously, if you can get past the first few rings and gorge it a few times, it becomes quite good. But still, I don't know, it's a 2 Ember, 3 Pip card. If I compare it to like Bounty Stalker, it's just so clear to me how much better Bounty Stalker is. Half the Ember price, 2/3 the Pip cost, way easier to get its scaling going. I don't know, I still feel like it's a B tier. Honestly, I almost put it in the C tier, but I have had enough runs where it definitely carried the run that it probably is. You know, the stuff I have in C tier and below has so rarely carried a run to / just never carried a run, so it didn't feel right to put Overgorger down there when technically it has carried runs for me. But it's like I would say it's distantly behind these other two, I would say. Also, Overgorger and Morsel-made is another fine infusion, I would say. Them together, in either way, whichever way makes more sense, depending on the point of the run you're at. Now we get to this C tier. So B tier, I would say, is they're still like good to great units. They just are a little more inconsistent than A tier. Maybe a decently amount more inconsistent, I would say. Now, C tier are gonna be highly more inconsistent, very much. They're either more consistent or just generally not that good. So first one I have here is the Bogwurm Cocoon. It just, 12 echoes is so much to ask for what you get in this unit. It's like, when it starts with 1/1 health, that's abysmal, to keep alive that long. Also, it costs 2 Ember and 3 Pip. So, it costs a lot to get down, it takes up a lot of floor space, and you have to defend this thing while you're hatching it. And I don't know if the payoff is even necessarily worth it a lot of the time, because once it hatches, you can be damn sure you're never putting anything else on that floor, because it's like 5 Pip when it hatches, I think. 4 or 5 Pip. And, I mean, if you have a continuous etch deck, then it will be good. But if you don't, it's useless, I would say. Even just hatching it and not continually etching after that, yeah, you got trample out of it, but was that really worth 12 echoes and all the space and everything? I highly doubt it. But, all that being said, it's good in Marshallord decks. It's good if you have like Soul Siphon or the steroid type, egg cards. But if you don't have, even if you have those, you need a few of them. Like, accelerated incubation only does 1/4 of the echoes that you need to hatch this, right? So even if you high roll on that, it's often not enough. And like I said, even if you hatch it, if you're not having continuous etch, I really don't think it was worth it. So there's enough situationalist. Is that a word? Situationality. shall we say, that I really don't think it deserves anything higher than a C tier. I honestly almost put it in the D tier, but it has carried runs for me, so I don't think it's worthy of the D tier when it has technically carried runs for me, similar to Overgorger. But I think I can make Overgorger work more than I can make a Bogwurm. Bogwurm's pretty tough to make work. The next one is C tier for completely different reasons. There's not really any ceiling, I feel, with Vinemother. It's just kind of meh. It's a unit that I liked more prior to the DLC because it was easier to just sort of sit it down on a floor and have it survive for several turns and basically give you a bunch of free stings. And also, you know, it was a decent 2-pip tank back when a 2-pip tank that didn't deal any damage was something that could be a good use of floor space. But both those situations are untrue now, I would say. You know, it's kind of useless to dedicate 2-pip on a floor just to something that doesn't deal any offense and just tanks. And it's not even that good of a tank at that. And then also the effect, like I said, it's much harder with all the amounts of incoming damage to just have it sit on a floor and survive a few turns. It's probably not even going to survive one turn. So I really don't think it's that good. The Essence has some niche uses. You know, you can basically get endless unit that you kind of get a full hand every turn, but you'll have a lot of stings in your deck at that point, but it can be useful in that regard. Overall, though, I really don't think it's that good. I think it's at least usable, though. Like, if you were to find this along with some other completely untakeable unit like the stuff in the D tier, I would still say I'd take this one almost every time. And same goes for the next one, Wilting Sapwood. It's just a bad unit, but unlike what's going to be in the D tier, spoiler alert, the rest of them are, at least it's playable. At least it's fucking playable. You know, it's 2 Ember, it takes 3 pip, it doesn't have good stats, and its effect isn't really all that great, but hey, at least it can be played and do things. You know, you can play it, if you add it some health, it can do some funky stuff with giving you a bunch of Ember, and I think it technically has a theoretical ceiling where it could be really good for certain decks. Like, if you had like a Consume Return, Shroud Spike deck, or any sort of spike that actually has a good X cost effect, you could actually do some pretty good stuff with this unit. But overall, it's generally kind of like Vinemother, just not really doing much. And also, the Essence is probably the worst Essence in the game. It's so bad. I swear if they would just make the Essence better, you'd see this unit get taken a little more. But, and I should say the Bogwurm has a pretty good Essence. It cost a pip to give you trample and some stats. That's a pretty good Essence. That's also a reason I think it's in the top of the C tier. Cause these Essences I hardly ever use. The, Sapwood and the Vinemother. But yeah, I almost put Sapwood in D tier, but I feel like D tier holds a special place for these fucking things. I'm gonna say Consumer of Crowns gets the first spot. I thought about giving it to Shadowsiege, because I feel like, you know, Consumer of Crowns also has a complete crap infusion, similar to Wilting Sapwood, except the funny thing is, it's just objectively better than Wilting Sapwood's infusion. You know, Wilting Sapwood has -2 Ember and a few stats. For some reason, they just gave literally the same 2 things, like stats and -Ember, but gave more -Ember and more stats for the Consumer of Crown Essence. It doesn't really make any sense to me, but either way, it's a bad Essence. It literally only makes sense into Lodestone Totem. Both of them are the same boat there. That's like the only unit it makes sense into. I don't even think it makes sense into something like a Shadowsiege, because it's still, like, it's too much to get that thing out. But the thing I'll say about Consumer is I feel like it's at least more playable than the other two. You know, I can get Imps down and have them stick in a Shardtail deck, particularly, like an Imp Parade one that doesn't have Imperialist. You know, in those cases, I could make this work, and the payoff is there. It does a lot of damage, and it's only 3 pip. These ones are like gigantic pip. And, it also doesn't, yeah, it's more playable than the ones I would say. It's probably not more playable than Glugsider. It's similar, but I feel like Glugsider's payoff just isn't as much as consumers. And the next one I'm giving, it's only edging out Glugsider because I think the essence is the best of the D tiers. So this is Shadowsiege. I really hate the design of this unit. At least Consumer of Crowns has a somewhat path forward to getting the unit out, as does Glugsider, but Shadowsiege's is just fucking stupid. It's like, you have to have a pip upgrade to even play it. And it's 6 Amber, come on. Like, literally the only way you play this unit in a realistic sense is like, you find sketches. It's just like, did you find sketches or did you not? You know, even Volatile Gauge needs a goddamn pip upgrade to make this work. At least Volatile Gauge, I can play the other units. Maybe not Glugsider, but I can definitely play Consumer with it. I can play Demon Fiend with it. Can't play fucking Shadowsiege. Need a pip upgrade. It's ridiculous. And it doesn't have, like the stats, I don't know. They're good stats, of course, but it's not like it has Trample or Multi-Strike or anything. I really hate the design of Shadowsiege, but all that being said, you can take it and use the essence. I don't think the essence is that good, though, I'll be honest. Like, it's not massively that much better than a large stone in comparison to the fact that you have to pay 2 pip for this essence. It is a lot of damage, I'll give it that, but I don't know. I think a lot of the times the essence actually isn't that good. The 2 pip is a lot to pay. And at the very bottom is, I think, the worst unit in the game, Glugsider. It's just so bad. You have to have an intrinsic Soul Siphon or you won't be able to play it. And even then, that's your best case scenario for it. And even then, it's really not that good. It only applies the Reap to the unit that hits it. So you can't even, like, do some self-damage torch type shenanigans. It takes up 4 pip, so good luck fitting anything else on the floor with it. And that's it. It has no attack. It has a lot of health, I'll give it that, but what's the use of a big-ass tank if you can't fit anything behind it? You know? You're pretty much forced into taking pip or having an egg, and an egg has anti-synergy with it because it's going to kill your echoes and make your Reap not actually do damage. So I think it's even worse, maybe even worse design than Shadow. All these bottom 3, I do not like the design of them. But yeah, that's all the rares. Let me know what you think. Let me know. I know y'all are gonna you're not gonna agree with me on Morsel-made. So let's hear it. Let's hear why Morsel-made is good. Cause I am not convinced. I'm not convinced that it's this free win type card. I'm convinced that all these are free wins, but, yeah, let's hear it. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.